If you're looking at the screen, I have made my first major typo of the class. We are not in James 1, 26 through 27. We will be in James 2, verses 1 through 7. So this is what happens when you copy your PowerPoints around. I built this template up off of another template, and it has very specific layout, and so in order to keep the features, I just copy last week's and edit it. This time I didn't edit it enough. So the topic is showing favoritism, but we're in James chapter 2. Before we get into our study, let's pause for a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we're grateful to you for the blessings of the day. We're grateful for the holiday season, and we're grateful for the provision that you make for our welfare, spiritually and physically. We pray that you will bless our assembly at this time, that we'll be encouraged and lifted up, that we'll drink from your word, and we will learn to be the kinds of people that you would have us to be, and to be the kinds of servants that you want. We ask that you would bless our teachers and bless our assemblies and bless our elders, deacons, ministers, and those who labor and serve in this congregation in various capacities. Bless them in their work and help us to be grateful for them and for the things that you have done through them for us. We ask that you would go with us when we depart and be with those of our numbering who are traveling at this holiday season, and return them safely to us once again. In Christ's name we ask it. Amen. So, the first maxim in James is James chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. It's gifts revealed in trials. And he opens his letter after giving a greeting his audience and says, "Count it all joy when trials come." Kind of an odd thing to start out with, but that's what he says. And the idea behind it is evaluate the situation, understand, its purpose. Its purpose is to produce endurance, and the endurance is going to make us complete and perfect. In James 1, 5 through 8, he says, if any of you needs wisdom, ask God. God gives abundantly and without reproach. But he also uses the word about being double-minded, and we talked about that. And basically it means when God gives the answer, don't try to pick it apart. Just, accept the whole thing. In James 1, 9 through 11, this is a topic that's relevant to our topic today. Human distinctions based on wealth or class are not relevant. He talks about the humble brother being lifted up and the wealthy one being brought lower. From God's point of view, they're the same elevation. So James 1, 12 through 18, a trial can assay our value and requires perseverance. And this comes from working with metals, where you're trying to test the purity of the metal. And the trial can do that to our faith and our character. Successfully bearing the trial brings the crown of life. He also goes into discussion about God does not tempt us. We're tempted by our own desires and lusts, and it has a life cycle. Lust, desire is conceived, sin is born, and when sin matures, it produces death. Very similar to a physical life cycle. And rather than tempting us, God bestows good things and gives perfect gifts, and God does not change over time or seasons. The second maxim is attitudes towards the word. And in James chapter 1, verses 19 through 21, James says, be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Being swift to hear does not mean listen to everything. It means choose carefully who or what you listen to, but be eager to do it once you've made the choice. Slow to speak is not the same as never say anything. A person who chooses a thoughtful, deliberate response deserves to be heard. The ones that when we're shooting our mouth off is usually when we get ourselves into trouble with the tongue. Anger can be a catalyst for change, but an unbridled anger can do great harm, and that's why James says the anger of man does not do the righteousness of God. Deliberately receive the implanted word. And again, this is a deliberate choice. Sit down, look at it, and decide this is what I'm going to receive, and take it into our character, and then that implanted word will produce the fruit of salvation. Be doers of the word and not just hearers. We should look intently into the perfect law of liberty and abide in it. This mirror, the perfect law of liberty, will reveal our spiritual image, both the good parts and the bad parts. We need to learn to bridle our tongues. This is one of the most difficult, simple things that we have to do. Everybody's shot their mouth off. We've all done this and said things that we didn't mean or probably shouldn't have said. So this is one of the things that we need to do in order to have what he calls pure and undefiled religion. And then the activity of pure and undefiled religion means to visit the orphans and widows in their distress. These are people that can't help themselves. They have no power to do anything on their own behalf, and they really don't have anything that they can do on your behalf as kind of a quid pro quo. Go in there, see what they need, figure out how to get it to them, and see to it that their needs are met. And then the second part of that is to keep ourselves unstained by the world. So That's the 5-minute version of chapter 1, and now we're going to take a look at chapter 2. I'd like to have a volunteer read James chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. Marnie? Okay, pretty long reading. You should be impressed that we're doing 7 verses this morning because we've been averaging 3. So, here are the terms that we're going to take a look at today. My brethren, do not hold faith. All of the other highlighted things on there. These are important to understand the passage. We need to understand what these things are. So, faith is the focal point of chapter 2. He starts off by talking about faith here, and he's going to talk about it in various ways throughout this entire chapter, so it's important that we have a definition of it. English definitions of the word faith include a strong belief or trust in someone or something, and we do this all the time. You go out to your car and you stick the key in the ignition or you press the start button. What do you believe is going to happen? It's going to start, and then you will be able to go where you want. Flip a light switch. So we do this all the time, where we have certain things that we do because there's an expectation that it's going to work that way. It's a strong belief or trust in someone or something. A belief in the existence of God, strong religious feelings or beliefs, a system of religious beliefs. So context will determine what the author's talking about when we encounter the word faith. This is from Merriam-Webster's dictionary. I like to go to these guys because they give good modern definitions of words. I found another definition, though, that I thought was kind of curious. The Oxford Languages Dictionary adds this definition: a strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. Okay, does anybody see anything wrong with that definition? Let me help you. Now, funny thing about this definition here is that there are people who are of a religious persuasion that will believe this definition. That is not faith. That is superstition. So there are people that will embrace it, and a lot of people will look at it in these terms, but that's not faith. Faith has evidence that goes with it. Faith is based upon experience, understanding, and reasoning. Faith is a choice. So in verse 1, James opens with the words, my brethren. This is a term of affection and indicates that James has their best interest at heart. He uses it again later in the passage. He has an affection for his audience. He has an affection for us, even though he doesn't know we're actually going to read this thing. The Greek word translated faith is pistis, which means a firm persuasion. This word comes from the Greek word pistos, which means trustworthy. So you have a firm persuasion in something that you can place your trust in. That's why you stick the key in the ignition, press the start button, and the car turns on, and nobody's surprised because it's supposed to happen that way. The verb hold means to have or to possess. So he's talking about holding on to our faith as though it's a physical object in our hands. Talks about an attitude of personal favoritism in the NASB. This comes from a compound Greek word that means to lift up the face of someone, or to receive someone with favor. So basically, it's paying a little bit of special attention in there, noticing that they might be special in some sense, or somebody that we might want to spend time with. We're acknowledging this in this word. Assembly is the Greek word synagogue, and it means to gather together. The ancient Greeks would have been perfectly comfortable saying something like, let's synagogue at my house to watch the big game. I'll make nachos. That's, under the condition that, number one, there's a big game. Number two, the Greeks watched big games on big screen TVs. And number three, they ate nachos. But synagogue was just a common word for assembly. But the assembly he's talking about here is this assembly, the assembly of Christians together at our particular times that we've chosen to do this. One who enters any gathering wearing fine clothes and a gold ring would immediately be recognized as wealthy. Wealthy Romans often wore rings on every finger but the middle finger. I don't know why they excluded that finger. But if you saw somebody walking around with a ring on every finger, you would say, okay, this individual's got a little bit of money to him. The Greek description for the clothes means bright and shiny. So this is new clothes, lots of rings. And if the rings are all gold, because they can make them out of various metals, but if the rings are all gold and the clothes are all new and shiny, this individual is very wealthy, and they are, in our terminology, blinged out. I don't know if we still use that now, but we did 10 years ago. So, they're dressed to kill kind of a thing. If a second individual comes into the gathering in cheap, shoddy, or dirty clothes, we can look at both, and we can figure out which one is wealthy and which one is not. Not a hard decision, is it, under those circumstances? Questions or comments? Yes?
Backing up a little bit to slide 10. Based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. I take that also to be almost like you said, I think, superstition.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds to me the term apprehension as in fear, as in they were observing it so they didn't jinx themselves almost.
Yeah. That's common superstition, isn't it? You don't walk under a ladder, because something bad could happen. There's actual physical reality, isn't there? What if whoever's up on the ladder drops a hammer while you're walking under it? Bingo, proof. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Let's see. So, in verse 3, the wealthy individual shows up in the assembly, and they get literally offered the best seat in the house. Going to show that, we really value your being with us. The less wealthy individual is told to stand over there or told to sit at my feet. Either option is a clear sign of social inferiority. You are not the people that we necessarily want to have in our midst here. In ancient culture, students would often sit at the feet of their teacher as a sign of respect. But now if you take somebody and force them to sit at your feet, you're making them show respect for you, whether or not we've earned it or whether or not they actually feel it. It's a subservient type of position, and it's very clear who's in charge. And so in verse 4, the Greek word is translated the distinctions by the New American Standard Bible, or show partiality, is diakronos, which means to judge through. And we've actually encountered this word before. This is the same word that was used in James chapter 1, verse 6, where James was talking about asking God for wisdom. And don't be double-minded. Don't pick apart the answer. Same word, exact same word here. So we're looking at the situation, and we're picking apart the situation to an interpretation that really isn't the one that we're supposed to be making. So we're picking apart God's answer. The word judges in this passage is from the Greek krites, and we get the English word critic from this word. We're talking about being a critic in this particular situation, judging by appearances. And the word that's translated motives is a compound word that refers to our inner dialogue. What do I mean by that? This is what we tell ourselves in the privacy of our own thoughts. You've often heard it said here as who's the person that lies to us the most? Ourselves. Whose behavior do we rationalize the most? Ourselves. Who is the person that we want everybody to feel like that's really special kind of a thing? To acknowledge as special? Ourselves. So that's the type of inner dialogue that he's talking about here in the privacy of our own thoughts. Wealthiest person, not wealthy person. I'm going to favor this person because I want them to be a part of this assembly or whatever reason that I have for that. This person, not so much. Plenty of those to go around. Verse 5, we'll talk about more in the next section. Dishonored is an accurate translation of the Greek. It means basically insulting. The Greek word oppress is from a word that means to exercise dominion or domination against. And that against is important. This is a hostile word. This is not domination over or domination in support of or anything like that. This is against. Blaspheme is transliterated from the Greek, and what that means is they just basically took every Greek letter and put one of our letters in there. But it's translated from the Greek, and it means to vilify, defame, revile, or speak evil of. Questions or comments? Oops, that wasn't what I meant to do. I have two big fingers for this thing. So, interpretation. Did I pass my thing? There we go. So, my brethren, a term of affection, do not possess your faith, your trust, in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ with an attitude of personal favoritism. Receive someone with undue favor is what he's talking about. For if a man comes into your assembly with a gold ring and dressed in fine clothes, blinged out, or as a sign of their wealth, and there also comes in a poor man in dirty clothes, and you pay special attention to the one who is wearing the clothes, and say, you sit here in a good place, and you say to the poor man, you stand there or sit down by my footstool. Have you not made distinctions? You've picked apart among yourselves and become judges, critics, with evil motives and evil inner dialogue. So we've already rationed this behavior out within ourselves, and we're acting upon it. Listen, my beloved brethren, did not God choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Is it not the rich who oppress you? Again, violent word. You and personally drag you into court. Do they not blaspheme the fair name by which you have been called? So, James uses a term of affection to address his audience. What he has to say may make the reader, and by extension us, feel uncomfortable or convicted, but he is doing so because this is what we need to hear. Bible doesn't go out and just try to upset us at every opportunity that it has. If we're upset with it, it's because there's a reason. It's trying to get us to correct behavior or learn something from it, and that's what he's trying to do here. So when someone new comes into the assembly or any other social setting, how do we evaluate them? If we evaluate them by personal appearance, we might reach an incorrect or improper conclusion, right? I mean, somebody comes in and they look wealthy. Great, they've got some money. Do you know how they got it? Not unless you know the individual very well. What if they got it from criminal activity as opposed to hard work or something like that? It looks the same, doesn't it? And so to reach a conclusion based upon personal appearances might not be the right thing to do in that circumstance. So, yes?
To base a person's spirituality on personal appearances can be a problem also.
Yeah.
And we do that.
Yes, we do. Or other types of appearances and things like that. So, yeah. And I'll go off on just a little bit of a tangent here. If you find that you're in the presence of somebody that you kind of react to negatively because of maybe the dress, the accent, or some beliefs that they might have or something like that, if you want to hold that attitude against them, do not, under any circumstances, get to know them. Because if you get to know them, you might find out things about them and come to the right and proper conclusion that they're not really all that bad. That they actually have a lot of redeeming values and things like that, and it'd be worth time and investment of doing it. So if you want to be hard-hearted against somebody, don't get to know them. Otherwise, your little facade's going to crumble in most cases. Sometimes it won't. I'll be honest about that, but most of the time, it will crumble. Other questions or comments? Now, we got this wealthy individual, this poor individual in our assembly here. James has already told us how to react in James 1, 9 through 11. What did he say? They're the same in God's eyes. There's no distinction here from his particular point of view. So, if we treat both with the same love and respect that God has for them, then we will treat them both correctly. Guaranteed. Guaranteed that we will. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't have to take some effort to get to know them or understand their situations or figure out, learn what they need or anything like that. But number one, they're here. Number two, treat them right, and they might stay and come again. If you make these false distinctions, who knows what's going to happen. The human tendency is to treat the wealthy guest much better than the poor one. Now, we all have this in. How many of you actually met a wealthy celebrity and spent some time with them? Anybody in here? Did you? Yeah. I met Jeff Foxworthy. Yeah. I met Jeff Foxworthy because my nephew married his niece. Yeah. Well, so I went with the wedding, right? Yeah. If you've heard of Jeff Foxworthy, kind of a country boy comedian, he says, if you've ever overhauled a transmission in your bathtub, you might be a redneck. That was his kind of style of humor. Really nice guy. I mean, and talking to him and things like that, very nice guy, very genuine. What you see on stage is that's who he is. So that was very pleasing in that regard. And yet, you still kind of want to buddy up to somebody like that. I didn't try to push my number off on him and say, let's be BFFs. If he had tried to push his number off on me and said, let's BFFs, we would have been BFFs, okay? Yeah. So, but it's heady to have something like that. And our motivation can vary, but let's be honest about it. Who doesn't want to have intelligent, wealthy, and influential friends who can provide a sense of personal value or validation and who will be there to help us when we need or want something special? But whatever reason we may have for doing this, once again, we're being picky judges operating based on our own value and not God's values. There were a lot of other people at that wedding that I could have gotten to know, and I did get a chance to converse with many of them, things like that, and they were always nice people. So, but Jeff was kind of special. We all wanted him to be kind of special. So, verse 5. Listen, my beloved brethren, did not God choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him? Now, this is not a truth statement or an absolute truth. This is kind of a general statement here. Those who are poor in this life are not automatically rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, okay? It doesn't work that way. But what you will find down through the ages, and this was true in the first century, true in the 21st century as well, most Christians have come from the middle and lower classes of whatever society that they're in. Now, two perspectives on that. If you're thinking about who are the top 5% most wealthy people on this planet Earth, take a look around. We're in that number for the most part. However, in our society, we are more middle class than that. And that doesn't mean that rich people will not become faithful to God. Abraham was wealthy and he was faithful, and other individuals, learned to use their wealth and service to God because they were hoping for the exact same thing that everybody else is hoping through. But down through the ages, most Christians have come from the middle or the lower classes. And one of the great difficulties with having wealth is that one tends to rely on that wealth to the exclusion of God. If you don't understand that you need something, how likely are you to go out and try to address that need? If you've worked hard all day and gone without a meal, what's probably at the top of your list about that time? Got to eat something. I'm hungry. Why? Because I've expended all of this effort and things like that. So you have a need and you want to solve it. When you have a lot of wealth, sometimes it's just self-reliance. I don't need anything else. I can take care of myself. Sometimes it's simply too many distractions. Again, not speaking in absolutes, but that's the tendency of it. And one may tend to believe that possessing wealth makes the possessor better than others and above laws and social definitions of proper morals and ethics that apply to lower classes. One of the things that we find in our society is prison populations. The people who are serving time in prison tend to come from lower class, middle class criminals, and not so much the wealthy. The wealthy behave better than the rest of us do. No, they just have access to more resources, don't they? And then a lot of times that they can manage to finagle their way out of, at least that harsh of a sentence or something like that, and get a better outcome for themselves because they have the tools to do it. So they have that ability. Also, constantly receiving preferential treatment reinforces a sense of entitlement. Do you know what people become when everybody tells them, you're fabulous, you're really a wonderful guy or a wonderful gal, and I really want to be like you, and all this kind of things like that? When you hear that 2,700 times a day, do you know what we become? Self-centered, egotistical. We keep hearing this type of a message, and then so that's being it already speaks to our inner dialogue, doesn't it? This is what we think about ourselves anyway. So, and on the other hand, a poor person doesn't have this crutch to rely on and tends to be more receptive to the gospel message. They at least understand what it means to need something, whether that be physical or spiritual, so they have a little bit of an advantage in that regard. Questions or comments? Showing this kind of partiality not only degrades the poor man, but it's actually inconsistent with reasonable behavior. See, look at how he talks about the rich in verses 6 and 7. He says, you have dishonored the poor man. Is it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court? Do they not blaspheme the fair name by which you have been called? The rich have a set of tools and things like that are available to them that most of the rest of us don't have, in terms of wealth, influence, what have you, and things like that. And if they have something that they want, it is difficult to oppose them because we just simply don't have the resources. So when he talks about the rich oppressing, they use their wealth and their power to get their way or to force their will on someone else. That's the way of the world, isn't it? The rich also are the same people who can drag Christians or others into court to get their way, or to avoid being dragged into court to pay for pay what they owe or pay for their own particular crimes. We have this image of justice. You ever watch a TV show and they have a courtroom in there? What's standing out in front of the courtroom? There's a female figure dressed in Greco-Roman. Did I do that? There's a female figure dressed in Greco-Roman clothing right there. She's got a blindfold on and she's holding up a set of balance scales to symbolize that justice is blind. Justice will be meted out based upon the weight of the arguments and the evidence without prejudice. Yeah, good luck with that. Good luck with that. If you and I are in a legal dispute over something and I have access to $2 million to fund my campaign, to fund what I want, to get what I want, and you have access to $200, who's going to win that fight? Yeah, my $2 million is going to win this fight. So that's not an uncommon thing to do in that regard, and it happens. And sometimes it doesn't work out quite the way that they want, but as a general rule, they say that victory always goes to the strongest. Well, that's not always true, but if you're putting money on it, bet that way, because that's the likely outcome. So application. In ancient world, Jewish synagogues were notorious for showing favoritism toward wealthy visitors. Again, human tendency, we can kind of relate to it, but that doesn't make it right. They were not alone in this. This is a common human tendency. Our mission, this is our mission as church, as Christians, should be to lead others to Christ. Those that we are trying to reach will pass through our doors to be part of our assembly. They will be here because they're at least interested, or they've been compelled in some sense to be here. And so how we treat them matters, does it not? You come into this building, you get treated poorly, you get treated with a cold reception. What's the likelihood of a second time coming into the building? Go to your favorite restaurant and stand there in the lobby while they're taking other people and they make you wait, and then when you sit at the table, it's not really all that clean and the food isn't all that good. What's the likelihood of you going back a second time? Yeah, you're going to notch them down a little bit. They might have been the favorite today, but they're not, they're moving down the list there. And that's the same way with people coming into our assembly. If we treat all with the same love and respect that God has for them, we will treat them correctly. So be friendly, be greeting, pay a little bit of attention to them. Yes.
It's a real thing.
Yeah.
I was a denominational preacher, was preaching at a big convention,
Mm-hmm.
and he wasn't dressed in like a man off the street,
Mm.
like a
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah.
We do that today.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, and James is telling us that's wrong. Don't do that. It's human nature to pay special attention to the famous, the wealthy, the influencer, or the celebrity. It is also human nature to expect special attention if we happen to be the famous, the wealthy, the influencer, or the celebrity. But God sees a human soul. And so our responsibility in how we treat people is to see everyone through the same lens that God sees. It's a human soul. It has value. It has eternity at stake. And so treat it like it's created in the image of God, because it is. And that goes a long way towards correcting a lot of this. If we show favoritism based on external appearances or reputation, we are picking apart based upon the wrong criteria. Yes, somebody may look good, somebody may sound good, and things like that. The image they present may not necessarily match the reality of their character or anything about that. And similarly, somebody may not look all that smart, may not look all that wealthy, may look a little bit dirt poor, something like that. The image does not display their character. It's still a human soul in both cases, and we ought to be focused upon that first and foremost. Famous or wealthy people tend to have more difficulty becoming Christians. In Roman society and most societies in general, the wealthy often have a keen understanding of their own self-interest and possess the tools to promote that self-interest. Sometimes those things are borderline immoral. Sometimes they are flat out hostile, but they have the tools to do it, and if that's what they want, that's what they're going to do. They have the wealth and the power to get what they want and a willingness to use it. So,
Can I say something?
yes.
I'm just thinking what you mentioned earlier, perhaps. When we go to other third world countries, and I've been to a few of them, they consider you and I very wealthy.
Yes, they do.
We need to really look at ourselves as wealthy
Yes.
and ask ourselves some of the questions that you're posing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if we're not careful, we say, well, John said I'm middle class and I don't have as much money, so I don't really have to consider the wealthy people he's talking
Yeah.
about. But I think he's really talking about us.
Yeah, that's why I said we're in the top 5% of the world income. Yeah.
Yeah, we need
You
to
know.
really think about that.
Yes.
You started off saying these verses had to do with faith, and I'm trying to correlate the faith with what all these verses are talking about, personal favoritism.
Mm-hmm.
Like in verse 1, it says, "Brethren, do not hold your faith in our Lord Jesus Christ with the attitude of personal favoritism." I'm having a hard time connecting faith to the personal favoritism.
I can understand that. There's another half of this maxim that we're going to do next week, so be here and we'll talk about that.
More to come.
I just love it when I get the opportunity to do that. No, it is, but notice that that's exactly the way he led, though, isn't it? Do not hold your faith in the glorious Lord with personal favoritism. That's his theme of this whole section here. So, it's important for us to understand, well, if we were holding our faith with personal favoritism, what does that look like? And it's also important, if we're not doing this, if we're going to do what James is telling us to do, what does that look like? So we get half of that this week. We get the other half next week. So
we really have to do that?
yes, you do. Yes. Well, you'll have to watch the video on home. I don't even know if they archive this. I hope not. But that was a good point and a good question. Yeah, it is like, we started here and now we're talking about all this other stuff. What's the connection? Well, that's what he led with, so he's got to connect it for us. Any other questions, comments? Yes.
I feel pretty good about myself when you say this, because I'm like, well, I don't look at the wealthy and the poor, and I feel a little righteous. But I think there's a version of this that probably hits every single one of us. We do have favoritism. We click up. We find people who sound like us and look like us and are educated us. And we don't not allow them in the assembly. But when I invite them to my home during the week for dinner, I go find the people that have kids the same age as my children. And so I embrace them differently. And that scares me because I know that's deep in my heart, that inclination to find people like me. And at the end of this verse, I see the word sin for that reason.
Yeah. Let me make it even more unclear to you. Yes. No. Well, no. But think about this. He's not talking about friends or family or things like that. There are certain people in this life that we are going to form closer, more intimate relationships with, than just people that we won't. And amongst those, we do treat our family different than others. We should treat our family different with others, and we should not hold other people in complete disregard because they're not part of our family. We treat our friends differently than most other people because we trust them more. We have a better relationship there. And so that's a scope of personal behavior that's good, and yet here's a context where making that type of judgment can in fact be the wrong thing to do. So it takes a certain amount of wisdom to be able to navigate that, don't you think? Yeah. It takes a certain amount of wisdom to be able to navigate that. So that's a good point, though, because we do, in fact, all do that. So now, James is not stating or implying that we should flip the script and be discourteous to the rich visitor and honor the less wealthy visitor. Why is he not saying that? Because you're still showing partiality. You just picked a different target, that's all. So, still saying treat them both the same. What James is showing is that by dishonoring the less wealthy visitor, we are both doing wrong, the word sin crops up in this discussion, and we are mistreating someone we have more in common with than we have with the wealthy visitor. Now, our goal for both should be the same, to bring them both to Christ. So the way that we do this, or one of the steps that we take in this, is we treat them both the way God wants us to. Any questions or comments? Now, there is a possible historical imperative in what James is writing here, and I want to share this with you a little bit in the time that we have left. If this letter is being written around 60 AD, which is what we said in the introduction, and that's, 60, 62 AD is what it feels like to me is about the time of writing, then the gospel has been in the Roman Empire for about 30 years. And they've heard it. I mean, they are aware of this group of people going around spreading this message about, they said, some guy who died, but they claim he's alive. That's the way a Roman centurion described it when they arrested Paul. This is going around in their empire here. And so the Romans are going to react to this. Now, second point, government and wealth go hand in hand. Wealthy citizens tend to be loyal to the people in the institutions that help them acquire and maintain that wealth. What does that mean? Well, every political campaign that we have in this country, what's the number one topic that's going to come up? The economy. It's in Bill Clinton's campaign, they had a sign on the wall that says, "It's the economy, stupid," because everybody tends to react this particular way here. It's always the economy is the first thing. If things are going well right now, somebody's probably likely to get reelected. If things are going terrible right now in the economy, somebody's likely to lose. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation, and it goes that same way in the ancient world. Wealthy citizens tend to be loyal to the people in the institutions that help them acquire and maintain that wealth. Government officials really appreciate the support of wealthy donors and contributors. Nobody's courting me from my checkbook, in a political campaign. Because whatever I would choose to give is not even a drop in the bucket of the other resources that they have available. And we're all pretty much in kind of the same boat on that. Now, going back to this issue of the gospel having been in the Roman Empire for 30 years, the Roman government and society has been maligning the followers of Christ for roughly 10 years. By this particular time, Roman writers and people who are what we would call influencers are describing Christianity as the plague of the countryside because it's going everywhere, permeating everything with its particular message, and they don't like it. So, as a result of this, in about 6 years, 4 to 6 years, Nero is about to begin a very harsh persecution of the church. The Romans are going to drop the persecution bomb. A lot of people are going to suffer, and a lot of people are going to die. This same persecution will be supported by many wealthy Roman citizens. Why? Because this is the institution that's going to keep them wealthy and powerful and influential, the Roman government, and this is what the Roman government wants to do. So James's language in verses 5, 6, and 7 in this passage may not be as figurative as we might suppose it to be. This is going to happen to them. It's coming. And the wealthy are going to be amongst those who are going to be oppressing the church in the first century. So, any other thoughts or comments? Yes.
This text might as well have been written to the Corinthians. We read a lot from 1 Corinthians 11.
Mm-hmm.
We do the Lord's Supper, but the precursor to that passage where Paul says, the Lord has said, and we read about the breaking of the bread and the fruit of wine, is just what James is saying. And I think Paul is being sarcastic. And this kind of lends to this idea when he says in 1 Corinthians 11:17, now I'm giving these instructions, I do not praise you, since you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For first of all, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. Now listen to the divisions. For there must also be factions among you, that those who are approved may be recognized among you. I think he's being sarcastic actually there, but he says, therefore, when you come together in one place, it's not to eat the Lord's Supper. For in eating, each one takes his own supper ahead of others, and one is hungry and another is drunk. What? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I do not praise you. I think that's a perfect case of what James is arguing actually happening in the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way they took the Lord's Supper, probably in those days as opposed to this auditorium, would have led them to kind of click up, as Bethany said, to kind of click up with your own. And actually, the rich may have gone first and taken some of the food, and somebody that was poor actually didn't even get to partake because it didn't even wait for them. So it was pretty messed up.
Yeah. Well, and he actually opens the letter to the Corinthians talking about factions. And what is that is personal favoritism to its core. So yeah, that's the. And in fact, if you look at the Corinthian example, it's far more destructive behavior described there than what we're seeing in James. But the point James is making is don't go down this path. This is sin. This is wrong. It demeans one and elevates another unjustly. Any other thoughts or comments? Because they're waiting to come on in. So I did make my 7 verses. Thank you for your attention and your comments, and we'll see you all next week.